Chapter 8. Power without resistance. Stop fighting the frame. Most resistance inside systems is unnecessary. It is not strategic. It is reflexive, and reflexive resistance is expensive. When people enter structured environments, corporations, governments, institutions, academic systems, social hierarchies, they assume strength is demonstrated through visible independence. They miscalculate. Systems do not respond to attitude. They respond to alignment patterns. Every structured environment operates through a pre-existing frame. The frame determines decision authority, escalation channels, resource allocation, risk tolerance, enforcement, capacity, reputational flow. When you enter, the frame is already stable. You are not interacting with individuals first. You are interacting with structure. Most people confuse disagreement with leverage. They think pushing against the frame increases influence. In reality, visible friction decreases optionality. Here's why. Systems protect predictability. Predictability reduces risk. When you signal resistance too early, you signal unpredictability. Unpredictability increases monitoring. Monitoring reduces freedom of movement. Freedom of movement is leverage. Therefore, early resistance lowers leverage. This does not mean compliance, it means timing. Power without resistance begins with structural mapping. Before speaking, before correcting, before opposing, you observe. You identify. Who actually decides? Who appears to decide? Where does information flow? Where does money flow? Where does approval originate? Where does it bottleneck? You distinguish symbolic authority from functional authority. Symbolic authority enforces visible order. Functional authority controls real outcomes. Many intelligent operators waste energy confronting symbolic power. They win arguments but lose access. Tactical positioning requires patience. You do not need to agree with a system. You need to understand its mechanics. The ego wants to demonstrate independence. The architect wants to maximize maneuvering space. These are different objectives. When ego dominates, resistance becomes emotional. When strategy dominates, resistance becomes selective. Selective resistance is precise. It is applied only when structural leverage is sufficient, outcome probability is calculable, downside exposure is limited. Until then, you move inside the frame without colliding with it. Collision creates noise. Noise attracts attention. Attention reduces flexibility. Silence increases room to maneuver. This is not submission. It is conservation. Energy saved from unnecessary resistance becomes strategic capital. Capital accumulates. Accumulated capital enables structural influence later. Operators who master this rarely appear rebellious. They appear stable, predictable, reliable. And because they are predictable, they are trusted. Trust increases access. Access increases influence. Influence allows controlled deviation from the frame, when necessary. Power without resistance is not about avoiding friction entirely. It is about choosing when friction is worth the cost. Stop fighting the frame. Map it. Learn it. Move inside it without triggering defensive responses. Only then does resistance become meaningful. In Sequence 2, we move deeper. How incentive hierarchies determine real power distribution. Incentive hierarchies. If you misread incentives, you misread power. And if you misread power, you generate resistance unintentionally. Incentives are the real language of systems. Not titles, not charisma, not public narratives. Behavior follows incentive density. Before you try to influence a system, you must decode its incentive structure at 3 levels. Level 1. Formal incentives. These are documented. Salary bands, performance metrics, bonuses, academic grades, KPIs, published standards. Level 2. Informal incentives. These are cultural. Approval, access, reputation, invitations, protection, visibility. Level 3. Structural incentives. These are rarely spoken. stability preservation, risk containment, hierarchy continuity, power concentration. Most operators only see level 1. Intelligent operators observe level 2. Architect-level operators decode level 3. Level 3 determines system survival priorities. If your actions threaten survival priorities, even unintentionally, resistance activates automatically. For example, an organization may publicly reward innovation, level 1. Culturally praise bold thinkers, level 2. But structurally depend on predictability to maintain investor confidence, level 3. If your innovation introduces volatility at scale, level 3 overrides levels 1 and 2. You will feel pushback, not because you are wrong, because you destabilized survival logic. Power without resistance means aligning with level 3 first, then navigating level 2, then optimizing level 1. In that order. Never reverse it. If you optimize visible metrics without respecting structural survival logic, you appear competent but dangerous. Dangerous actors are limited. Limited actors lose leverage. There is another dimension. Incentives create blind spots. Systems rarely perceive their own structural biases. That means you can move laterally inside blind zones. Where do blind zones exist? Where formal rules are rigid but enforcement is inconsistent. Where cultural approval exists without clear accountability. Where responsibilities are diffused. These are low-resistance corridors. You do not confront the core, you move through the periphery. This reduces collision. Strategic operators also track incentive volatility. Incentives shift when leadership changes, market pressure increases, crises emerge, reputational risk rises. If you operate using outdated incentive maps, friction increases unexpectedly. Therefore, incentive mapping is continuous, not one time. Every quarter, every transition, every restructuring, incentive weights adjust. The question is not, what do they say they value? The question is, what behaviors survive long-term? Long-term survival behavior reveals structural preference. Align with structural preference, temporarily, and resistance drops. Once access and trust accumulate, you gain capacity to shape incentives gradually. Shaping incentives requires leverage. Leverage requires position. Position requires access. Access requires predictability. Predictability requires controlled alignment. This is not moral compromise. It is sequencing. Sequence is power. Missequencing creates friction. Correct sequencing creates momentum. Momentum reduces resistance naturally. You are not fighting the system, you are reading it. In sequence 3, we move deeper. Hierarchy is not vertical only. It is layered and lateral. And most leverage sits outside visible chains of command. Hierarchy is not vertical. Most people misunderstand hierarchy. They imagine it as vertical, top, middle, bottom. That is the visible layer. Real hierarchy is multidimensional. Vertical hierarchy determines formal authority, but lateral hierarchy determines operational power. And in most systems, lateral power moves faster than vertical rank. If you only read vertical structure, you will miscalculate leverage. Titles are slow. Influence is fast. Vertical hierarchy answers, who has final decision authority? Lateral hierarchy answers, who shapes what reaches that authority? These are different questions. In many environments, the person with the highest title is not the person with the highest influence. Influence accumulates through information control, narrative framing, relationship density, reputational capital, gatekeeping capacity. Gatekeepers are rarely visible at the top. They sit between layers. They filter access. They control agenda flow. They decide which ideas are presented upward and which disappear quietly. Power without resistance requires identifying gatekeepers early, not confronting them, not bypassing them aggressively, understanding them. Every gatekeeper operates under incentive constraints. If you align your movement with their incentive logic, resistance decreases. If you ignore them, friction increases. There is another overlooked layer: network hierarchy. Some individuals hold modest titles, but possess dense cross-department relationships. They can accelerate or stall initiatives without issuing formal orders. These actors shape momentum. Momentum influences perception. Perception influences promotion. Promotion influences authority. Lateral power often precedes vertical power. Most operators attempt to impress the top. Strategic operators cultivate alignment across lateral networks. This builds distributed support. Distributed support lowers resistance when proposals move upward. Here is the tactical model. Step 1. Map formal authority chain. Step 2. Map informal influence network. Step 3. Identify bottlenecks. Step 4. Determine whose approval is necessary versus whose awareness is sufficient. Not everyone needs to agree, but the wrong person feeling threatened can generate obstruction. This is where ego mistakes reappear. If you treat hierarchy emotionally, you either over-defer or over-challenge. Both create friction. Over-deference signals weakness. Over-challenge signals unpredictability. Both reduce trust. Neutral precision reduces resistance. When speaking upward, frame proposals in alignment with structural priorities. When speaking laterally, frame proposals in alignment with operational benefit. Different audiences require different positioning. Consistency does not mean uniform messaging. It means uniform objective. There is one more dimension: time and hierarchy. New entrants face higher resistance. Established actors face lower scrutiny. Longevity compounds trust. Trust compounds latitude. Latitude reduces resistance. Therefore, early-stage operators must prioritize predictability. Mid-stage operators can introduce calibrated divergence. Late-stage operators can shape direction openly. Timing matters. Hierarchy is layered. Power flows diagonally. If you only climb vertically, you miss leverage corridors. In Sequence 4, we examine compliance strategy: when to align, when to defer, and when to redirect. Strategic compliance. Compliance is misunderstood. Most people interpret compliance as submission. That is naive. Compliance is positioning. If you reject compliance categorically, you eliminate maneuvering space. If you comply blindly, you surrender leverage. Strategic compliance sits between these extremes. It is selective alignment. It is temporary alignment. It is calculated alignment. Every structured system requires baseline conformity: dress codes, reporting protocols, approval procedures, communication tone, documentation standards. These are surface constraints. They are not the system's core. Fighting surface constraints rarely produces structural gain. It only signals volatility. Volatility triggers oversight. Oversight reduces autonomy. Strategic compliance asks, which constraints are symbolic? Which constraints protect structural stability? Which constraints are irrelevant to trajectory? Symbolic constraints can often be followed at low cost. Structural constraints must be respected until leverage accumulates. Irrelevant constraints can be ignored quietly if they do not trigger enforcement. The key distinction is enforcement density. Some rules exist only as deterrents. Others are actively policed. You conserve energy by complying where enforcement density is high. You conserve identity by ignoring low enforcement irrelevancies. Compliance becomes a bandwidth allocation strategy. Energy saved from symbolic battles can be redirected toward structural positioning. There is another dimension. Visible opposition creates identity fixation. If you publicly resist minor rules, you become associated with disruption. Disruption reduces trust among risk-averse actors. Risk-averse actors often hold structural continuity power. Strategic compliance protects predictability. Predictability increases trust. Trust increases delegated autonomy. Delegated autonomy increases maneuvering range. This is the progression. But compliance must never contaminate internal architecture. External alignment must not become internal absorption. This requires psychological separation. You follow procedure without identifying with procedure. You use structure without internalizing structure. You speak within hierarchy without believing hierarchy defines your value. That separation is critical. Without it, compliance becomes conformity. Conformity dissolves independent architecture. Strategic compliance also includes calibrated deference, not submission, not flattery, precision. When authority speaks, you evaluate. Is this instruction structural? Is it ego-driven? Is it protective? Is it defensive? If instruction aligns with structural incentives, comply efficiently. If instruction is ego-driven but harmless, comply minimally. If instruction destabilizes trajectory, redirect instead of oppose. Redirection is superior to confrontation. Confrontation escalates resistance. Redirection preserves relationship. Example of redirection. Instead of saying, "That approach is wrong," you say, "If the objective is X, perhaps we can also consider Y." You shift without triggering defensive response. Systems resist humiliation. They rarely resist enhancement framed within existing goals. Strategic compliance is language control. It is timing control. It is emotional neutrality under authority. The objective is simple. Move through the structure without becoming its friction point. If you become the friction point, resistance concentrates around you. If you move fluidly, resistance distributes elsewhere. Distributed resistance weakens. Concentrated resistance blocks. Choose which environment you create. In Sequence 5, we examine controlled visibility. How to remain influential without attracting destabilizing scrutiny. Controlled visibility. Visibility is currency, but unmanaged visibility is liability. Most friction inside systems begins not with opposition, but with exposure. When you become highly visible without sufficient structural backing, you activate defensive reactions. Not because you are wrong, because visibility without embedded alignment feels destabilizing. Systems regulate exposure. If you appear faster than the system can metabolize you, resistance forms. Controlled visibility means calibrating exposure to match leverage. Too little visibility, and you become irrelevant. Too much visibility, and you become a threat. The objective is neither invisibility nor dominance. It is stability under observation. First principle. Visibility should expand in proportion to accumulated trust. Trust is built through predictability, delivery consistency, and alignment with structural incentives. If your visibility expands faster than trust, friction rises. Second principle. Separate competence visibility from ambition visibility. Competence visibility increases perceived value. Ambition visibility increases perceived competition. Perceived competition activates protection behavior. If you signal ambition too early, lateral resistance increases. If you demonstrate competence steadily, ambition can remain implicit. Implicit ambition is less threatening. Third principle. Control narrative framing. When your work becomes visible, how it is framed matters. Is it framed as contribution or as challenge? Is it framed as support or as disruption? Narrative determines interpretation. Interpretation determines response. Strategic operators pre-frame their visibility. Before presenting ideas, they connect them to shared goals. Before showcasing results, they credit collaborators. Before introducing change, they affirm existing structure. This reduces defensive reactions. There is also a rhythm to visibility. Constant exposure increases scrutiny. Scrutiny amplifies minor deviations. Intermittent visibility preserves flexibility. Appear when impact is measurable. Disappear when consolidation is required. Visibility should be event-driven, not ego-driven. Another critical factor. Vertical versus lateral exposure. Excessive vertical visibility without lateral support generates isolation. Excessive lateral visibility without vertical recognition generates stagnation. Balanced exposure reduces resistance. You do not need everyone to see you. You need the right people to see you at the right time. Controlled visibility also protects optionality. If you over-attach your identity to public perception inside a system, you become sensitive to feedback. Sensitivity reduces precision. Precision requires emotional neutrality. Visibility should serve trajectory, not validate identity. There is a subtle test. If visibility withdrawal makes you anxious, your leverage is externally anchored. If visibility withdrawal feels strategic, your leverage is internally anchored. Power without resistance requires internal anchoring. External anchoring amplifies reactivity. Reactivity increases friction. Friction increases resistance. Controlled visibility is disciplined exposure. It allows growth without triggering systemic alarm. In Sequence 6, we move into energy conservation. How to allocate cognitive and emotional bandwidth inside structures without burnout or backlash. Energy allocation inside systems. Most friction inside systems is not external. It is internal depletion. Operators burn cognitive and emotional energy reacting to micro-events that have no structural consequence. Energy is finite. Influence requires surplus. If your energy is constantly drained by minor irritations, symbolic disagreements, status comparisons, perceived slights, informal competition, you will lack capacity when real leverage windows open. Power without resistance begins with energy discipline. First rule: not every stimulus requires a response. Systems generate noise continuously. Email threads, meeting remarks, tone shifts, recognition asymmetry, invisible competition. If you react to each micro-disturbance, you surrender strategic bandwidth. Strategic bandwidth must be preserved for structural decisions. Ask before reacting. Does this event change trajectory? If no, ignore. Does this event alter access? If no, ignore. Does this event affect structural positioning? If no, deprioritize. This is not emotional suppression, it is prioritization. Second rule: separate ego triggers from structural triggers. Ego triggers feel urgent. Structural triggers have measurable consequences. Ego triggers include being interrupted, not being credited immediately, seeing others praised, minor criticism. Structural triggers include exclusion from decision channels, access reduction, responsibility shifts, role redefinition. If you cannot distinguish between these two categories, you will exhaust yourself defending identity instead of protecting position. Third rule: limit horizontal comparison. Comparison drains energy without increasing leverage. If lateral actors receive recognition, analyze the incentive logic instead of reacting emotionally. What behavior is being rewarded? Is it relevant to long-term structural survival? If yes, adjust. If no, ignore. Comparison without structural analysis creates friction. Analysis without comparison creates clarity. Fourth rule: control emotional tempo. Systems operate at varying speeds. Some environments are high urgency, others are slow and bureaucratic. If your internal tempo mirrors external volatility, you become unstable. If your internal tempo remains steady, regardless of external speed, you remain composed. Composure reduces resistance. Volatility attracts resistance. Fifth rule: reserve energy for escalation points. Every system contains moments where decisions are made, structures shift, power consolidates, incentives recalibrate. If you are depleted before these moments, you cannot act decisively. Operators who conserve energy appear calm during turbulence. Calm signals control. Control signals reliability. Reliability increases delegated autonomy. Autonomy reduces friction. Energy allocation also requires environmental filtering. Limit unnecessary exposure to internal gossip, reputational speculation, informal status games. These increase emotional volatility without structural gain. Bandwidth is strategic capital. If you spend it on symbolic battles, you cannot invest it in structural advancement. The disciplined operator appears indifferent. They are not indifferent. They are selective. Selective engagement lowers resistance because it reduces emotional unpredictability. Unpredictable actors are monitored. Monitored actors have less room to maneuver. Maneuverability is power. Energy discipline protects maneuverability. In Sequence 7, we examine redirection strategy, how to shift system movement without triggering defensive counterforce. Redirection without confrontation. Direct confrontation inside systems triggers defensive reflexes. Not because opposition is wrong, because confrontation threatens control perception. When authority feels publicly challenged, it prioritizes preservation over evaluation. This is predictable. Redirection avoids this trap. Redirection does not deny structure. It bends movement inside structure. Most friction emerges when someone says, "That's wrong. This won't work. You're mistaken." These statements force binary framing. Binary framing activates ego protection. Ego protection escalates resistance. Redirection reframes without forcing defensive posture. Instead of opposing conclusions, you reshape inputs. Instead of attacking decisions, you expand criteria. Instead of challenging authority, you support objectives while adjusting pathway. Example: direct confrontation. This strategy is flawed. Redirection. If the objective is long-term stability, perhaps we could also consider. The second maintains alignment while shifting trajectory. Systems resist humiliation. They rarely resist enhancement. The redirection principle has 4 components. Goal alignment. Always anchor discussion to shared objectives. If you skip alignment and jump to correction, resistance increases. Language modulation. Avoid absolute statements. Replace, "This is wrong," with, "Could we explore an alternative?" Modulated language lowers threat perception. Timing. Do not redirect in high-visibility moments unless leverage exists. Redirection works best in contained settings. Public correction escalates defensive escalation. Private reframing reduces ego stakes. Incremental adjustment. Large deviations create alarm. Small directional adjustments compound quietly. Small shifts over time change trajectory without visible rupture. There is a deeper reason redirection works. Systems operate through momentum. Momentum resists sudden change. But momentum can be nudged. When you redirect gradually, the system feels continuity, not disruption. Continuity lowers resistance. There is also hierarchy sensitivity. Redirect upward differently than laterally. Upward redirection requires respect framing. Lateral redirection requires mutual benefit framing. Downward redirection requires clarity framing. Same objective, different interface. Many operators fail because they use one communication style across layers. Uniform style signals rigidity. Rigid actors create friction. Adaptive framing reduces friction. Redirection also requires emotional neutrality. If your tone signals frustration, even well-framed suggestions appear oppositional. Tone often triggers resistance more than content. Neutral tone reduces activation. Another critical element: know when not to redirect. Not every decision deserves adjustment. If the structural impact is low, conserve energy. Over-optimization creates suspicion. Excessive correction signals ambition or instability. Stable actors redirect selectively. Selective redirection builds reputation as measured. Measured actors gain listening weight. Listening weight increases future influence. Redirection is quiet leverage. It does not look powerful, but it accumulates direction over time. Direct challengers burn brightly. Redirectors move trajectories. In sequence 8, we enter escalation zone. Now we examine structural patience, how long-term positioning eliminates the need for resistance entirely. Structural patience. Impatience creates resistance. Not because systems are hostile, because systems are slow. Most structured environments prioritize continuity over speed. Speed introduces uncertainty. Uncertainty increases perceived risk. Perceived risk activates resistance. When you attempt to accelerate change faster than a system can metabolize it, friction is inevitable. Structural patience neutralizes this dynamic. Patience is not passivity, it is pacing intelligence. Every system has absorption capacity. Absorption capacity is the rate at which new ideas, behaviors, or actors can be integrated without destabilizing internal equilibrium. If you exceed absorption capacity, the system rejects you. Rejection may not be explicit. It can manifest as stalled approvals, delayed responses, silent exclusion, ambiguous feedback, increased scrutiny. These are not personal attacks. They are structural immune responses. Understanding immune responses prevents emotional overreaction. If you interpret structural slowdown as personal rejection, you escalate prematurely. Escalation increases resistance. Structural patience means monitoring tempo. Before advancing a proposal or position, ask, has enough alignment been accumulated? Has lateral support been secured? Has incentive compatibility been verified? Has visibility been calibrated? If the answer is incomplete, delay. Delay is not retreat. Delay is preparation. Many operators fail because they reveal capacity before system readiness. They introduce ideas without preconditioning environment. They seek recognition before trust density stabilizes. They push for authority before relational legitimacy forms. This produces defensive contraction. Strategic patience builds legitimacy quietly. Legitimacy compounds. Compound legitimacy reduces future resistance. There is also sequencing intelligence. Do not introduce structural change and visibility expansion simultaneously. Do not escalate ambition during instability. Do not redirect publicly during transition phases. Sequence your movements. First, stabilize perception. Then expand competence visibility. Then increase access. Then test small directional adjustments. Then expand influence. Skipping steps produces friction. Following sequence reduces it. Structural patience also protects psychological stability. If you expect rapid transformation inside structured systems, you create chronic dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction increases impulsive behavior. Impulsive behavior increases unpredictability. Unpredictability increases monitoring. Monitoring reduces maneuverability. Patience preserves maneuverability. There is a paradox. Those who appear patient often move faster long-term. Why? Because they avoid resistance cycles. Resistance cycles waste energy. Energy waste slows trajectory. Patience maintains forward motion without interruption. Another dimension. Time reveals hierarchy stability. Some actors appear powerful short-term, but lose influence over cycles. If you over-align with volatile actors, resistance rebounds. Patience allows hierarchy clarity. Clarity reduces misalignment. Structural patience is strategic restraint. It is understanding that systems are inertia-based. Inertia cannot be pushed violently without counterforce. But inertia can be redirected gradually. Gradual redirection becomes invisible. Invisible redirection faces minimal resistance. This is the point where power becomes quiet. No confrontation, no friction, just cumulative positioning. In Sequence 9, we examine leverage windows, how to detect moments when resistance temporarily weakens. Leverage windows. Resistance is not constant, it fluctuates. Most operators assume systems are uniformly rigid. They are not. Every structured environment has periods of heightened stability and periods of temporary vulnerability. These temporary vulnerability phases are leverage windows. Leverage windows appear when leadership transitions occur, crises disrupt normal routines, performance metrics shift, external pressure forces, internal recalibration, reputational risk rises, resource allocation changes. During these moments, resistance weakens, not because structure disappears, because structure reallocates attention. When attention reallocates, monitoring loosens. When monitoring loosens, maneuverability increases. The disciplined operator does not attempt major movement during stability peaks. They wait for recalibration cycles. The mistake most people make is pushing during peak rigidity. They confront when the system is most defensive. Defensive systems intensify enforcement. Enforcement increases resistance. Instead, watch for instability. Instability produces ambiguity. Ambiguity produces negotiation space. Negotiation space reduces friction. There are 3 types of leverage windows. Type 1. Transitional windows. Leadership change, restructuring, role reassignment. In these phases, expectations are renegotiated implicitly. Early positioning during transition can redefine perception before patterns solidify. Type 2. Crisis windows. When external shock destabilizes confidence. Crisis increases decision velocity. Decision velocity reduces deliberation layers. Reduced deliberation lowers resistance to new input. But crisis windows are high risk. Intervention must align clearly with structural survival logic. Otherwise, backlash intensifies. Type 3. Saturation windows. When a dominant approach stops delivering results, fatigue emerges. Actors become open to alternatives. This is subtle. Saturation windows require observation of declining enthusiasm, not official declaration. Timing matters more than brilliance. A well-framed idea introduced during rigidity is ignored. A modest proposal introduced during recalibration can redirect structure. Power without resistance requires temporal intelligence. Temporal intelligence means understanding, not only what to say, but when to say it. There is another layer. Do not announce leverage. Use it quietly. If others perceive opportunism, trust declines. Leverage must appear aligned with structural interest, not personal advancement. This is sequencing discipline again. First, align publicly, then act during window, then normalize position after shift. Never celebrate early. Never signal that resistance weakened. Stability will return. When stability returns, system memory reactivates. If you exposed aggressive ambition during vulnerability, correction follows. If you moved proportionally and framed it as service, integration stabilizes. Another important principle. Not every window requires action. Impulse to act during every instability signals insecurity. Strategic patience and temporal intelligence must work together. Wait for windows that align with your trajectory. Ignore those that distract. Leverage windows also compound. If you build trust before transition, your proposals during transition carry more weight. If you preserved energy during stability, you can act decisively during vulnerability. Operators who are exhausted or emotionally reactive miss windows entirely. They see only immediate friction. They do not perceive pattern shifts. Pattern recognition reduces resistance because it avoids unnecessary force. Instead of pushing against rigidity, you step through softness. Most systems are rigid at surface level, but flexible at transition points. Surface rigidity discourages amateurs. Transition flexibility rewards disciplined actors. This is why power without resistance appears effortless. It is not effortless. it is timed. In sequence 10, we move deeper into identity stability under scale. How to expand influence without internal distortion. Identity stability under scale. Operating inside systems without resistance is not only external strategy, it is internal architecture. As your leverage increases, as visibility stabilizes, as access expands, scale changes pressure patterns. At small scale, resistance feels direct. At larger scale, resistance becomes subtle. It appears as expectation inflation. When you become reliable, the system increases demand. When you become visible, the system increases scrutiny. When you become influential, the system increases projection. Projection is dangerous. Others begin attaching narratives to you. Future competitor, emerging authority, risk factor, potential ally, threat to balance. If identity is externally anchored, projection distorts behavior. You begin acting in response to perception instead of structure. This is the beginning of internal resistance. Internal resistance manifests as over-defending reputation, over-managing impressions, over-explaining decisions, over-correcting tone, over-seeking approval. These behaviors increase friction. The paradox: as you grow, the system applies softer but more complex forces. It no longer blocks you directly. It reshapes expectations around you. Identity stability prevents this reshaping from hijacking internal alignment. Identity stability means your trajectory is internally defined. Your evaluation criteria are internally set. External feedback informs, but does not define direction. This does not mean ignoring feedback. It means filtering feedback through structural priorities. There are 3 tests of identity stability under scale. Test 1. Visibility withdrawal. If recognition decreases temporarily, does your energy collapse? If yes, identity is visibility dependent. Test 2. Criticism spike. If criticism increases with exposure, do you adjust trajectory or refine execution? Trajectory adjustment under pressure signals instability. Execution refinement signals stability. Test 3. Authority expansion. If new authority is granted, do you escalate ego or deepen precision? Authority destabilizes actors who seek validation. Authority stabilizes actors who seek structural influence. Another dimension. Scale amplifies contradiction. Different actors hold different expectations of you. Some want speed, some want caution, some want visibility, some want discretion. You cannot satisfy all without dissolving identity. Identity stability requires prioritization. You decide which expectations align with trajectory, which are noise, which are misaligned incentives. This requires emotional neutrality. Emotional neutrality under scale is rare. As influence grows, so does attachment to image. Attachment increases defensiveness. Defensiveness increases resistance. Resistance increases scrutiny. Scrutiny increases distortion. This loop must be interrupted. The interruption is internal anchoring. Internal anchoring is clarity about long-term positioning, structural leverage goals, energy allocation boundaries, reputation tolerance. Reputation tolerance is critical. If you require universal approval, you cannot operate without resistance. Selective approval is sufficient. Universal approval is destabilizing. At scale, friction shifts from confrontation to narrative manipulation. Actors may attempt subtle repositioning of your image, not through direct conflict, through association, through framing, through omission. If identity is externally defined, this destabilizes you. If identity is internally defined, you adjust positioning calmly. Power without resistance at scale means you are not provoked by narrative shifts. You respond only when structural consequence appears. This reduces unnecessary escalation. It increases long-term trajectory control. You stop playing short cycles. You play compounding cycles. In sequence 11, we move into leverage consolidation. How to convert accumulated positioning into durable structural advantage. Leverage consolidation. Influence without consolidation dissolves. Many operators learn how to move without resistance, but fail to convert that movement into durable position. Movement is temporary. Position is structural. Power without resistance becomes meaningful only when leverage stabilizes. Leverage consolidation means transforming access into permanence. There are three consolidation mechanisms inside systems: access control, information, positioning, dependency, structuring. Access control. When you gain entry to decision channels, your objective is not immediate dominance. It is normalized presence. If your access appears exceptional or disruptive, it can be revoked. If your access appears useful and predictable, it becomes routine. Routine access becomes structural. Structural access becomes durable leverage. Do not overuse new access. Overuse signals ambition acceleration. Acceleration invites recalibration. Recalibration reintroduces resistance. Use access selectively. Information. Positioning. Information flow determines influence density. If you become a reliable interpreter of complexity, your structural value increases. Not by hoarding information, but by clarifying it. Systems reward actors who reduce uncertainty. If you can translate complexity into decision-ready insight without destabilizing hierarchy, you consolidate leverage. But information positioning requires restraint. If you expose too much instability at once, you appear destabilizing. If you conceal too much, you appear untrustworthy. Balanced transparency builds reliance. Reliance builds durability. Dependency. Structuring. Dependency is often misunderstood. It is not manipulation. It is structural utility. If others depend on your consistency, clarity, or reliability, replacing you becomes costly. Costly replacement reduces resistance. Dependency must be value-based, not emotional. Emotional dependency generates backlash. Operational dependency generates stability. How do you build operational dependency? By becoming the bridge between layers, between vertical authority and lateral execution, between complexity and clarity, between strategy and implementation. If removing you increases coordination friction, your leverage consolidates. But consolidation requires subtlety. If you signal indispensability, you trigger defensive restructuring. If your value is recognized organically, resistance decreases. Another principle. Consolidation must be invisible in intention. Visible consolidation looks like power accumulation. Invisible consolidation looks like stability contribution. Systems resist accumulation. They accept stability. There is also a time dimension. Consolidation must follow patience. If you attempt consolidation before legitimacy stabilizes, it appears premature. Premature consolidation invites counterbalance. Counterbalance reduces position. Therefore, first align, then move, then wait, then consolidate quietly. The order matters. Many operators sabotage themselves by accelerating final positioning. They mistake early success for structural permanence. Systems tolerate rising actors. They resist prematurely dominant ones. Consolidation also includes redundancy buffering. Do not attach leverage to a single relationship. Diversify structural anchors. If your position depends on one actor's support, resistance can be triggered by a single shift. Distributed anchors increase stability. Stability lowers resistance. Finally, consolidation must remain aligned with trajectory. If you consolidate influence in areas that do not support long-term vector, you trap yourself. Trapped operators create internal resistance. Internal resistance manifests as stagnation. Consolidation is not accumulation. It is alignment between influence and direction. When consolidation stabilizes, resistance decreases significantly. Because your presence is no longer perceived as intrusion, It is perceived as structural necessity. In sequence 12, we close this chapter by examining the final layer, when power no longer generates resistance, because your positioning becomes structurally inevitable. Structural inevitability. There is a point inside systems where resistance fades, not because the system changes, because your position changes. When alignment is strategic, visibility is controlled, energy is conserved, timing is precise, leverage is consolidated, your presence no longer triggers defensive reflex. It becomes normalized. Normalization is the final phase of power without resistance. Most actors seek dominance. Dominance creates counterforce. Counterforce generates friction. Friction sustains instability. Structural inevitability operates differently. It does not seek dominance. It seeks indispensability. Indispensability is not declared. It is experienced. When your role reduces coordination cost, increases clarity, stabilizes communication, improves decision velocity, lowers risk. Removing you becomes inefficient. Inefficiency increases resistance to your removal. Resistance shifts direction. It is no longer directed at you. It protects you. This is structural inevitability. It is subtle. It is quiet. It does not announce itself. At this stage, opposition loses energy. Criticism softens. Gatekeeping decreases. Scrutiny becomes procedural, not targeted. Why? Because you are no longer perceived as volatility. You are perceived as continuity. Continuity is protected. This is the paradox. When you stop fighting the system, stop signaling ambition prematurely, stop reacting emotionally, stop overexposing, stop forcing movement, the system gradually integrates you. Integration reduces resistance. But inevitability requires internal discipline. If ego resurfaces after consolidation, you destabilize your own position. Actors often sabotage inevitability by escalating ambition once resistance drops. They overexpand visibility. They consolidate too aggressively. They signal power accumulation. Systems detect imbalance quickly. Imbalance triggers recalibration. Recalibration reintroduces resistance. Therefore, structural inevitability must remain proportionate. Your expansion should match system absorption capacity. Your visibility should match trust density. Your influence should match legitimacy. Legitimacy is slow. It compounds through consistency. Consistency creates predictability. Predictability lowers systemic threat perception. Threat perception reduction is the core mechanism of friction elimination. When threat perception disappears, movement becomes frictionless. This is the real meaning of power without resistance. Not rebellion, not domination, not secrecy. Positioning that no longer provokes defensive energy. There is one final element. Structural inevitability does not mean stagnation. It creates optionality. Optionality is strategic freedom. Once resistance lowers, you can expand scope, redefine role, transition to new structures, or design parallel systems without triggering defensive collapse. Because your movement is perceived as stabilizing, not destabilizing. This is where Chapter 8 closes. We moved from mapping the frame, understanding incentives, reading hierarchy, strategic compliance, controlled visibility, energy discipline, redirection, structural patience, leverage windows, identity stability, consolidation, and now inevitability. But inevitability inside one system is not the end. It is preparation. Because the next question is not, how do you move without resistance? The next question is, where should you position yourself strategically for long-term scale? That is Chapter 9. Chapter 9 becomes tactical, position selection, environment evaluation, leverage scaling, system choice. Power without resistance prepares you. Chapter 9 decides where to deploy it. Subscribe for more hidden architectures that shape human thought, perception, memory, and behavior. Let's build this archive together.